Hi, and welcome to Magic Numbers. This is episode number 39, and today we're back to Theros Beyond Death. Because from tomorrow on, for 2 weeks, you will have access to premium draft Theros Beyond Death. I'm going to give you some data-related pointers to how to play this format, how does it differ from any other formats, which cards you should pay attention to, which characteristics of the format are important. But before we go into that, as always, there is my preamble, my couple of minutes of random ranting, which help me warm up to the stream and also help you give up some kind of a thought that might be related to the seminar topic. And today's thought is slow formats promote better play. And this is something that I thought because how bad I was in Theros Beyond Death at the first incarnation of the format. This format promotes the kind of play style that most of the modern pros come from as a background. And that means very careful playing, accruing minute advantages and converting those minute advantages from each individual action into the final victory in the game. Nickel and diming is another term that might be used. And if you're nickel and diming, you cannot make errors because one error completely negates all the previous advantages that you accrued so far and swings the game in the opponent's direction. That's why formats like this that rely very much on accruing those small incremental advantages will promote players that play flawlessly. And Theros Beyond Death, I think, is one of those kind of formats. It's also a format that will very in large extent promote better game plan and planning your actions ahead, and for instance managing your removal. So it's a good idea for you if you want to improve in those particular aspects to play as much of it as possible, because this is a rare format in the modern times. Lots of the formats that we're currently playing, you can get by addressing set synergies or knowing how to forge decks, and they will, self-correct. Theros is not one of those formats. It's a format that is slower than the others. You see more of your deck, and careful management of threats is, for example, something that you really need to put your head into. Like, for example, in a fast format, your opponent will maybe see 40% of your deck. Here they might see 60% of their deck in many games, maybe 70, which means that if they have a bomb, they will dig into it. And then you can't just kill things at sight. You have to carefully plan how you use a removal so that if they do have that bomb, you might be able to deal with it. And trust me, this format does have those bombs, so it's worth keeping that they exist in mind. And I think that even though this is not my strong point and this is not really the gameplay that I find particularly comfortable in, that's probably exactly why I'm going to play quite a lot of the Theros Beyond Death. I hated that format, I was losing in it continuously, and I will grind my teeth and play draft after draft because I know that if I was poor in a format, that means that this is the opportunity for me to improve on something that I'm clearly not good at. I know that there were people that had extremely high win rate in this format, and I was not one of them. And this is exactly why I should play it more rather than avoid it, because this is where my weaknesses lie, not in the formats where I have 62, 65% win rates. So also a word of advice. I know that it sucks to lose, but you can approach losing in two different ways. You can approach it in, oh, I hate losing, I'm not going to play this format because I lose in it. Or you can approach it my way, which is, I hate losing, I don't want to lose in the future when a similar format will drop on Arena. I'd rather prepare myself and get better in a format that I'm particularly weak in. And with that out of the way, the data summary for today, obviously the 17 lands data comes from 17lands.com. I would highly encourage you to use the website, support them if you have means to support them, because, well, that's where all the limited data that I'm using usually comes from. And I know that many people rely on this data to some extent or another. I think buying them a coffee once in a month is not a terrible thing to do. Now, the data I took comes from two sources, and one of them is a quick draft data file that I had somewhere stashed in my computer, and that contains around 100,000 games. And some of the data comes from the 17lands.com website itself, also from the quick draft repository. But those data are slightly different, and you will see what does this difference show. Okay, so because the format has been a long time ago, and maybe some of you didn't even play during the era when the format started, I'm going to first cover some of the main mechanics of the set because why not? I think that the main mechanic of the set was escape, and escape says you may cast this card from your graveyard for its escape cost, and the escape cost comes in two installments. First is a mana, and here we have this Underworld Charger. It costs 3 mana. It's a 3/3 that cannot block. You can escape it for 5 mana, but on top of paying that 5 mana, you also need to exile 3 other cards from your graveyard. And it escapes with 2+1/+1 counters. So when you play it for 3 mana, it's a 3/3. When you play it for its escape cost, it becomes a 5/5 that also cannot block. And every escape card will have the mana cost and the exile X cards cost. Most of the time it's 2, 3, or 4, but there are some spells that have, for example, 8 cards to escape it. And of course, the more cards you need to exile, the harder it is to cast. But the good news is that you can recast the escape creature for as long as you can. So if it dies again, you can still escape it again, and you will be able to play it again. The mechanic is generally focused around black, red, green, but it does exist also in blue and also in white to some extent, minor extent. Black, red, and green are the colors that do have creatures in with escape, while white and blue do not. The presence of this mechanic in the set, if you have an escape laden deck and you don't want to over exaggerate on escape because you can only escape that many cards, so you have to make difficult choices which card to exile, which card to play. But this causes some versions of self-mill to be treated as a sort of card advantage, because A, you can mill your escape card and play it for the escape cost from the graveyard, or if you mill multiple cards, you can use them as a fuel for escaping something that already was in the graveyard. So some amount of self-mill is beneficial, and it's been talked during the format that, like milling 3 cards is like drawing a card, more or less, in this format. It's a mechanic that is key to have access to, because even if you're in one of those colors like white or blue, it's nice to have something with escape, because you can probably bet that your opponents will have access to. And if you come to a draft where opponents have lots of escape cards in their decks and you don't have any, it's like coming with a knife to a gunfight, which is generally considered not to be a good idea. So even this like 1 or 2 strategical blue or white escape cards is something useful to have, because it allows you to use your resources more rationally. Now there's 23 cards with escape in the set, and I think that because we're coming back to the set, so maybe not everyone is up to date with the rulings on those. Once someone escapes a card, you can't exile it, because when we play reanimation spell, there is this ability to exile the reanimated card before it resolves, and then you basically counter the reanimation spell. It doesn't work with escape, because escape is a cast sort of ability. So once you declare casting it, it's no longer in the graveyard, it's on the stack, and therefore it cannot be targeted. So if you want to get rid of those escape cards, do that before the opponent has an ability to escape it from their graveyard, because otherwise you won't be able to. Okay, a second mechanic that is the big overarching mechanic that covers all the colors is devotion. It's generally a higher rarity mechanic. There are a couple of commons, and I think that those commons sort of concentrate in the Abzan color combination, so black, white, and green. But most of it is on uncommon or rare level. There are 5 demigods, one for each color, and there are 6 gods, one for each color plus one in 2 colors. So that's already 11 cards with devotion, plus various rares, uncommons, and mythics on top of that. And a couple of commons, and some of those commons are quite important, like Blight Breath Catoblepas, which is a 6 mana 3/2 that gives -X at the ETB. Gary is an uncommon, as the chat suggests. Oh, yeah, but Gary is, of course, the picture I chose. Catoblepas gives -X, where X is your devotion to black. And that's one of the most probably important cards with devotion at the common rarity. Other ones are rarer, and because of that, devotion is more like a side theme than a main theme. I don't think that the decks that leaned heavily on devotions were ever successful in this format. So don't treat it maybe as something that you want to build around. Treat it as something that you want to treat as a reward of being like, maybe maybe you're slightly heavier black in your deck than in your black and white deck. You're heavy on the black, and then you can play Gary. And Catoblepas are becoming better or something, but you shouldn't treat it as something that you want to build around. And this mechanic is probably much better and constructed when you can literally devote your deck to getting devotion. See what I did there? But in the end, there are 23 cards that have this mechanic, so that you'll be able to use it on occasions, and it's worth to remember how. Now, devotion checks the numbers on resolution. So if you play Grey Merchant of Asphodel, aka Gary, you can kill something as the ability resolves, and then the ability will do less damage. So, like for instance, if they play Gary, they have 4 black devotion, including Gary. You kill Gary in response to its own ETB trigger, they will only drain for 2. So that's something to remember. Jason ILTG, who I can guarantee you had a much better win rate in this format than I did, also mentions that this is the one thing that makes Omens better. Omens is the set of 5 enchantments that do something specific to a particular color. Because you play them, they are sort of spells that later stick to the battlefield, and because of that, they increase automatically your devotion, and that makes them slightly better. Not that they need to be made better, they're already quite good on their own. Okay. Next mechanic is maybe more 3-color specific. It's Constellation. It's focused around white, blue, and green. But the interesting feature of it is that it exists in 3 very different flavors in each of those colors, which probably will be an answer to a couple of things that you will see in the archetype win rate data later. But in white, it's sort of aggressive. Most creatures that have Constellation have aggressive mechanics. It's sort of grindy in green, and here is an example of card with Constellation. It's basically a 2 mana 1/3. Whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, you look at the top 3 cards, reveal a land from among them, and put that in your hand, and then put the rest at the bottom of your library. So you basically, it's very much like Quandrix mage from Strixhaven that did similar ability on whenever you cast a spell. Only this one is costing 2 mana. It doesn't need blue, and it's a 1/3. It's a pretty good card in this format, actually, if you want to play those grindy decks, and allows you to never fall behind with your mana and cast your expensive spells or double spell. Use the card advantage to your advantage. And I wrote that Constellation is weird in blue, and yes, it is. If you look at the blue Constellation cards, they have weird abilities that don't have any cohesion or sense. It also exists on some higher rarities in blue, particularly. So yeah, basically, blue Constellation is not the greatest in terms of card quality. The important part, because all those triggers in Theros come at different stages of the game, and Constellation is an enter the battlefield trigger. So once you do play an enchantment, you don't have a guarantee of getting that Constellation trigger if the spell gets countered or if the target of an aura gets removed. No, if the target gets, yeah, it fizzles, so it doesn't come into play. So be careful with that. If you really need that Constellation trigger, make sure that you will be able to resolve your enchantment. And there are 13 cards with Constellation in the set in those 3 colors. And the cardboard notebook mentions there is a bunch of cards that focus on enchantments that don't necessarily have Constellation written on them. So that's so that's something that is to keep in mind. There is plenty of enchantment synergies, and I will be talking about, obviously. Oh, look at that. Set mechanics enchantments. Now, first of all, this set has enchantment creatures, which means creatures that are also enchantments at the same time. And they are split quite evenly between all the colors, and there's several multicolor ones as well. So every color will have access to some amount of enchantments. So that makes it that, for example, if you have white red, you won't have to lean heavily on white to get your Constellation triggers for the white Constellation cards, because red will have a number of enchantments and enchantment creatures at the same time. Now, 32 of those enchantments are at common, and plenty of them are quite important cards for the format, as you will see in a second. And around half of those enchantments are creatures themselves. Now, this is maybe a bit misleading, because a bunch of those enchantment creatures are gods, which are not always enchantment creatures. Okay. And the last set mechanics, as I called it weirdly, is bombs. Oh, hey, Jamie Topples. Thank you very much for the raid. I hope you had a good stream yourself. We're going back to Theros and trying to explore some data based on the format. We just went through briefly about what mechanics are in the set, but you arrived in a perfect moment, as we are going to start to dive into what each archetype is supposed to do and which cards are important for it based on the 17 lands data. For all of you in the chat that don't know Jamie Topples, shame on you. You should. Jamie is an amazing streamer, probably one of the top 5 streamers in terms of enthusiasm in playing the game, and mainly plays limited, which is great for us limited folks. I watch Jamie Topples regularly if I can, if her agenda is not actually at the time when I'm sleeping or working. I try to do that. So I highly recommend give Jamie a follow. And of course, thank you very much for the raid. For the Jamie's crowd, I wouldn't shame you for not knowing me, because you probably shouldn't. I'm Sherkovitz. I collaborate with 17lands.com, which is a website that gathers data for limited. And every week I make a seminar that explores a bit the data for a particular topic. And today I'm talking about Theros Beyond Death, because tomorrow we can jump in and start drafting the Resurrected Theros Beyond Death. And I was talking briefly about the mechanics of the set. I covered the main ones, so Escape, Devotion, and Constellation. And I arrived at the mechanic of bombs that you can't deal anything with. It's a stupid mechanic, but well, it does exist, so what can one do? And I know that people said that Theros Beyond Death is a princely format, but I don't think it necessarily is. However, it will be an extremely princely format if you play multiple round sealed deck events, because in those you will probably have the top tables that almost everyone has: a Dream Trawler, Kiora Bestis, Sea God, Archon of Sun's Grace, or Polukranos Unchained, because these particular 4 cards are way beyond anything else in the set. So all of these cards are within half a percentage points in terms of win rate from each other, with Dreamcrawler leading the pack very narrowly from the data from old drafts, with game in hand win rate and game in hand win rate, which means the win rate if you drew Dreamcrawler in any stage of the game. So it doesn't mean you played it. So there will be games where you didn't play the Dreamcrawler, and maybe that's where the 30% comes from. But Dreamcrawler has 17.5% game in hand win rate. Curabest the Sea God, I think, is like 0.3% lower. Archon of the Sun's Grace and Polychronos are another 0.2% lower from Curabest the Sea God. So these four cards are extremely close and extremely far away from everything else. Creme Flash asks, what about Ashok? Don't worry, we have that. We have that in the next slides. So these are the four absolute bombs of this format. But obviously, as in every format, there is multiple cards that will be better than any common and uncommon. And I picked, I picked all of them in this slide. So apart from the four bombs that are really head and shoulders above the rest, Ashok is actually number 5. Then we have the first Iron Games, another Planeswalker in Calyx, Nadir Kraken, the thing that either grows or whenever you draw a card can grow and make a creature that thing gets out of control very quickly if you cannot deal with it. Heliod, one of the gods, one of the 6 gods that are present in the set. This one is particularly good because the passive ability on it is really good. So even if it's not a creature, because it being a creature depends on your devotion to white, so it not always will be a creature. But even if it's not a creature, it's still pretty annoying. As it grows your other creatures, which means that you are more likely to hit your devotion target and get this 5/5 indestructible massive bear. We have Trix and Setessan Champion, which is a sort of enchantress creature that draws your card when you play enchantments and also grows. And Aphemia, another very solid aggressive creature with some abilities to go wide. Heliod just wins. But these 8 cards, along with the 4 from the previous slide, these are the 12 rares that have a higher win rate than any uncommon and any common. So these are the bombs of the format, basically. And I mean, yes, they are powerful, but in many ways you can deal with them. So there's ways of removing, countering, over-aggroing them, and things like that. Now, Dreamcrawler is particularly annoying because you can't deal with it, as it will get almost certainly hexproof. Curabest the Sea God creates a hexproof Kraken that's 8/8, which is super annoying and then completely blows your plan the next chapter when you cannot do anything. So this is super annoying. Polychronos just keeps on coming back and not for super expensive. It does need 6 cards, but you deal with it once, you need to deal with it second time, and it's twice as big the second time. And Archon of the Sun's Grace can create so much damage before you deal with it that because it makes Pegasi every time you play an enchantment. So if you play it right, you can basically create 3 Pegasi, and that should be enough to take over the game, even if they get rid of the Archon. And also, they have to get rid of it from the table because pacifying it is not an option, as constellation triggers will still happen. So Creme Flash says it's 12 bombs, not a red one. Red mages, something face. There are some red strong cards just after that. So there is the Phoenix with Escape that is really good, just below the best uncommon. I think that the Akron War is just below that. So there are red cards, they're just slightly lower. So they are not at all missing. And I think red is by far not the worst color in this set. So as we will see maybe by the color combinations. So I wouldn't cry as a red mage. Red is pretty solid, and there is plenty of strong uncommons also in that color. Okay, so that's the set mechanic. Bombs. very useful mechanic to have. But you will hear a lot of people complaining about Dream Trawler because it is a particular feel bad to lose to that card. And yes, it will happen. But and there are not so many of those super broken cards. And obviously, Dream Trawler, I can guarantee you, it should have been a mythic. There is no reason for that card to be a rare, except for creating bad feelings in losing opponents. Kremflesh says, I really loved Akron War, such a great card. I agree, it's one of my favorite arts ever. Like, literally perfect art. Okay. So format stats, I started to look at the data from my old Excel sheet with 100,000 games. I started to look at the format data from the 17 lands archives. I basically went on the color win rates on the 17lands.com and basically extracted it for Theros Beyond Death. You might need to change your calendar to get to the time when Theros was played, because that's been a while ago. But once you do it, and if you remember that it was before the time of human drafts, then you can get the numbers on each archetype, keeping in mind that these are numbers based on bot drafting. So yeah. So basically, I'm going to go through each archetype from the one with the lowest win rate, Simic, to the one with the highest win rate, which was Azorius. And then we're going to do something else. But I'm not going to give you a spoiler, but it's going to be just to show you why one should not get stuck to the win rate data of archetypes that strongly. But we have Simic, Dimir, Izzet. So 3 of the bottom decks are blue, and with green, black, and red. Which the irony, of course, is that the white-blue is the strongest archetype here. Which is kind of funny, as Isaiah mentions in the chat. Then we have Gruul and Golgari, 2 green archetypes. So also, like in the 5 bottom, there are 3 green and 3 blue archetypes. So I guess that clearly suggests that green and blue are sort of on the poorer end of the spectrum, and especially with Simic being the poorest of the archetypes, that's what I guess we would have to draw out of it. Then we have like a mixture of the Mardu archetypes, black, red, white, black, and red, white. They are very close together. So, I mean, from this 55.8 to almost this Azorius, there is very little difference, just like 2 percentage points. All in all, every single piece of data in the format I looked tells me that this format is very balanced. It might be bomb heavy, but it is very balanced, which is usually a sign of a healthy format that people will say it's unhealthy, because people notice bombs much easier than they notice disbalance in colors, as very often invested players maybe see the disbalance, but they benefit from it greatly, and less invested players are more likely to remember that one game when they lost to Polukranos than those 57 games that they lost to Steel and Sack and AFR for some reason. And then we have the last 2, Selesnya and Azorius. And I'm going to tell you a bit about each of them, starting with Simic and ending with Azorius. So this is going to be exactly the same formula for every color combination. I'm going to first talk about the uncommons, starting with the signpost, because every one of the 10 color combinations is a signpost uncommon. Then I'm going to show you the top uncommon, my pick, which is a card that I would like to draw your attention to. And then I'm going to do the same with commons, only instead of signpost, I'm going to show you the top common, and instead of top card, I'm going to show you the best enchantment, unless the enchantment is already the best card, and second best enchantment, because of the enchantment theme being so important. And one my pick, which a card that I find interesting because of the data, because it's underpicked, because it had better numbers than I expected, something like that. It always has a different reason, just basically something I found interesting in the data. So blue-green's theme is sort of constellation. And Signpost Uncommon is exactly that. It's a 3-mana 2/2 with Constellation. Whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, and it gains flying until end of turn. So Eutropia, if you get a couple of Constellation triggers, it will be 3 mana and possibly, like 5 power and 5 toughness, which would be great. The problem is that, of course, as a 2/2, it's not guaranteed to survive. Still, it has a decent game in hand win rate based on the fact that this color is the poorest color, around 57.6%, not far off the top card, which in my simple brain means that it really, the archetype, should be at least trying to do what the Signpost Uncommon does. My golden rule of that is that if the Signpost Uncommon is close to the best uncommon altogether, I would probably try at least initially to do what the archetype is doing. And if the Signpost Uncommon is really bad and other cards are quite high, I would probably think, okay, this archetype, you shouldn't do what wizards are telling you to do, but you may try to find some other avenues to make that particular archetype work. In this case, it's close enough for me to think, yeah, you shouldn't be ashamed of trying to put Constellation. Eutropia is not a bad card on its own. If you have some other synergies or other cards that let you have multiple Constellation triggers, it might be quite interesting. The best uncommon, and it's something that probably a lot of people in the first run of Theros underestimated in the beginning how good this card is Threnody Singer, and that's 2 mana flash 1/3 with flying. And when it enters the battlefield, target creature an opponent controls gets -X/-0 until end of turn, where X is your devotion to blue. And it means that if it enters the battlefield and it doesn't get killed in response, even if you had an empty board, it will give -1/-0. And it's a ambush 1/3, which will deal with X1s quite well. You would think, well, minor effects. But in the late game, when you can make it -4/-0, this can make huge swings in combat, especially when you're attacking into a good blocker and you can kill it, and then they won't kill your creature. Or if they attack with something super big and you double, triple block it and make it -5/-0 and it does nothing, that can make massive swings in the late game. And the card has really, really good game in hand win rate. Flop, come back. Well, there we go. And my pick for this archetype was the Nessian Wanderer. I think that this deck, if it was good, it was very mana hungry. And if the deck is very mana hungry, if the deck is mana hungry, you really want to have the access to your lands. And Nessian Wanderer was brilliant in that particular aspect. And this is something, again, very similar to the Condrix Apprentice, which was doing the same thing for the very mana-hungry spell-based decks in Strixhaven. And you should use it exactly in the same way. Just make sure that you have enough enchantments on curve that you would be able to get, 2-3 lands out of it. And if you get 2-3 lands out of it, you should be way in front on mana from your opponents, in best of one especially. And because of that, you will be favorable in that game if you have a solid Constellation deck. At least you will be less disadvantaged. Proco Brito, I will talk about it after I finish the archetypes. Okay, so don't worry about it. But indeed, you're acutely speeding up the conclusions. Okay, so the commons, the top card in this particular archetype was Warbriar Blessing. This was one of the how Scryfall? Why don't you have the clear picture? Something wrong when it loaded in. Obviously, I take all my pictures from Scryfall. Scryfall is the best. Please support Scryfall as much as you support 17 Lens, if not more. Warbriar Blessing is a 2-mana aura enchanted creature. You can only enchant creature you control, which is something that comes into which is something that comes into play because once your creature gets stolen, the Warbriar Blessing falls off of it. And when it enters the battlefield, this creature that you targeted fights something else, and enchanted creature gets +0/+2. So it's sort of like a fight spell that's also an enchantment at sorcery speed, but it also gives a big boost to the toughness. So it will be, well, quite likely that your creature can kill something without getting killed itself. So that has a very solid win rate of 59.3%. And notice that this is higher than any single uncommon. So blue green was maybe slightly abandoned by its uncommons compared to other colors in terms of like super impactful uncommons. That's why it wasn't as successful. If the best card is a common, and even the second best common is Citizen Training, which I call top enchantment. Obviously, Warbriar Blessing is the top enchantment, but it's a top card altogether. So Citizen Training gets the silver medal and somehow gets mentioned. It still is, well, on par with the best uncommon from the color combination. So, and by the way, before you start asking, these data are only pertaining to the win rates when played in the decks of those color combinations. So if I say that Citizen Training has 58.3, it means 58.3 in blue-green decks. I don't count the green-white, green-red, whatever. It's only in the blue-green decks. Citizen Training is a 2-mana aura again. Also enchanted creature you control. This one was even more important because sometimes people try to steal a creature with trample, and then they realize that it doesn't have trample as soon as they take it because the Citizen Training falls off of it as it changes owners. But basically, it has a cantrip at ETB, and enchanted creature gets +1/+0 and has trample. So neat thing if you have big dumb beasts that don't have trample, give them +1/+0, give them trample, draw a card, get all the constellation triggers. Perfect for the later game if you can somehow guarantee that you're not going to get blown out by removal in response to it, which there are ways of ensuring. And the card that I picked was Eidolon of Philosophy, because I remember this card being pretty poor during the run of the format, but it had some really decent numbers in those quick draft data sets. So maybe there is something in Eidolon of Philosophy that we missed, because these numbers look solid. I'm not saying it's a top card, but it's definitely above average for the archetype. And that was something that surprised me. So I picked this card to maybe highlight it a bit more. Maybe you can try it over the first week and then see the numbers of the current run. If they are poor, then it was just a, it's a 1-mana constellation trigger, and it can do something in the super late game. And this format was, spoiler, pretty slow. So you have much better chance of getting that 7 mana, especially if you play things like, I'm pointing at the screen. You can't see me pointing at the screen. Why am I pointing at the screen? If you have something like Nessian Wanderer, there you go, laser pointer, much better than me pointing at the screen that you cannot see. Okay, so that was the blue-green. The blue-black. So blue-black, uncommon. The signpost is the Devourer of Memory, a 2-mana, 2/1. Whenever one of more cards are put into your graveyard from your library, Devourer of Memory gets +1/+1 until end of turn and can't be blocked this turn. And for 3 mana, so 1 blue-black, put the top card of your library into your graveyard. Which means that it can trigger itself. You can pay 3 mana to basically give it +1/+1 and unblockable until end of turn, but any other self-mill effects will also trigger it. It's just that if you mill 2 cards as one effect, and there are a couple of cards that do that, it will only get +1/+1, not +2/+2. So it only gets activated for each instance of being targeted by a mill spell, independently of how many cards you mill, and not for each card that was milled. So this card was particular, and I did have some success in a couple of builds with it, but they were super weird tempo builds with a card called Sleep of the Dead, if I remember correctly, which is basically a card with escape that allows you to tap something and it doesn't untap until on the turn, and it also has escape. So you basically self-milled yourself, put those Sleeps of the Dead into your graveyard. You could tap the opponent's creatures, and you can attack with weird creatures and devour itself. I think that you can see that already from the numbers that basically it's way below the top uncommon. It's true, Elspeth Nightmare is an exceptional card, but it's still nothing impressive in terms of the win rate from the Devourer of Memory. I think that there is a sub build of Blue Black that will utilize it well, but this is not the strongest sub build of this deck. It had more success in playing things like Elspeth Nightmare, which is basically kill a creature, discard a card from opponent's hand, exile their graveyard, which, if you play against the right deck, is basically game, set, match. And Alerios Enraptured is another card that was really good with 60% win rate. That's a creature that comes with its reflection into battlefield. So basically, you get a 5/5 stats for 3 mana over 2 bodies. Only Alerios itself, himself, I guess, won't do anything until the reflection dies, because it's the myth of Narcissus, who is fallen in love with his own reflection. Once the reflection gets killed, then he gets into action and becomes a 2/3. Otherwise, reflection is flipped stats, so instead of 2/3, it's a 3/2. I think the design in terms of flavor is brilliant on this card. Strength of the card is also pretty good, because you play the Alerios and you have a couple of bodies to prolong the game, and I think that's what Blue Black wants to be. It wants to be this kind of attrition-y archetype, preferably, with Ashiok as your top end or something like some. There are a couple of silly blue bombs as well that you can utilize with bunch of black removal. And I think that if this gives you again, pointing at the screen that you cannot see, if this gives you the idea that it might be a good attrition-y archetype, Mire's Grasp, Final Death, one of the best cards at common level. Mire's Grasp, particularly strong in this archetype, 61.6% game in hand win rate. So pretty much on par with Elspeth Nightmare. Mire's Grasp is a phenomenal card in this set, and you have to be from minute one literally in tune with the thinking that this is uncommon level card. This is not far off from the inspired overseer level, because being an enchantment gives you so many extra things while you play it. Keep in mind, there's so many micro synergies with that being an enchantment that it's just so much better than an instant that gives -3/-3 or something. Top enchantment obviously was the Mire's Grasp, but the second best enchantment was Omen of the Sea, another card that would be very good in those grindy attrition-y archetypes, because it gives you so much hand fixing. It's a flash enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you scry 2 and then you draw a card. So you potentially have a choice of 3 cards. Well, choice of 2, and then you can gamble the third one. And at the same time, you can sacrifice it to scry 2. So another way of fixing your draws and making sure you hit the things in your stride rather than get flooded or something. So very good flood insurance in all ways, because it prevents floods in the late game by letting you scry lands under. And at the same time, you can sacrifice it if you don't need it for any kind of devotion purposes, and you scry more, so you get it better. Progressive MTG asks, what about Mire Triton in uncommon selection? It was very close. So it's definitely decent, but it's better in other versions of Black Cube. It will appear, yeah. It will appear. I was actually surprised when I look at this data. The card selection was very broad. It was a lot of cards were not very good in one archetype or the other. So there was clearly specificity. There are some powerful cards, but there are cards that shine in particular in different builds. And my pick was Final Death. Not because I think it's an exceptional card. I think that the card is looking very medium, to be fair. Like 5 mana, instant speed, exile target creature. But exile is very important, because if you can get this annoying escape creature that would just outgrind you over a long game, and you can final death it, it's great. And also, this format is really friendly towards removal. Removal is really good in this format for some reason, and I picked this card just to show you that basically we have Elspeth's Nightmare, which is a removal, Myra's Grasp, and Final Death are all really good cards in this particular archetype, and you will see plenty of other removal as we go through the best cards. So very much like the more recent sets are all about good quality threats. I think that this format was about good quality removal. You still needed threats, but removal was way better. Metal Mario thinks, do you think removal is better because the speed of the format is on the slower side? I think so, and I don't know. You probably missed my preamble when I was talking about why slow formats are good for learning to play better, because every mistake is amplified quite a lot when you're, as I called it, nickel and diming your opponent and accruing small advantages. I think that because this is not a 2-for-1 format, but exactly this accruing of small advantages to create a bigger advantage by nickel and diming. I think that's why removal is good, because if you already 2-for-1 your opponent and they kill the creature, well, you already got one. But if your creature makes sort of 1.2 cards of effects and you kill it, you're 0.2 into the bag, but that's fine. You can survive it. It's not like that you're one card behind, and that's why removal is good. And especially when you play something like Final Death and you can exile the threat forever, which would be recurring, or if you have Myra's Grasp, and on top of having the removal, you might as well get some kind of constellation triggers, or there are a couple of cards that whenever creature with aura dies, do something. It will allow you to get the thing, or putting a card in the graveyard is a 1/3 of a card for a black deck. So if you use a removal, you draw 1/3 of a card every single time you use it in this format, basically. Okay, let's move on. Blue-red. Now, blue-red signpost uncommon is mischievous chimera. Mischievous chimera. I love it that they put the two different pronunciation of the CHI in the same card. It's 2 mana, 2/2 with flying, obviously for the blue and red. Whenever you cast your first spell during each opponent's turn, Mischievous Chimera deals 1 damage to each opponent, scry 1. And this is sort of what the mechanism of the blue-red was. It was casting spells at your opponent's turns. And as you can see, Chimera has the same win rate as the top card of the archetype, which means that probably Chimera was the good thing to play. Not necessarily because you wanted to play this kind of instant deck, although I did want to play that deck and I played it a lot, and that was the only successful archetype for me in the format. But it's also a very good rate monster. I mean, it's a 2 mana 2/2 flyer, and it has an ability that can ping for additional. And yes, chimeras are good in blue-red. So when you think blue-red, you think chimera. The best uncommon in general, ex aequo, is Shimmerwing Chimera, a 4 mana, 3 and 1 blue. 3/2 flyer. At the beginning of your upkeep, return up to 1 other target enchantment you control to its owner's hand. And when you think about the omens that we already seen, the one that you can scry to and draw a card, if you can bounce that every turn and replay it, and especially if you have another chimera, the other chimera and play, you can replay it at the end of your opponent's turn and ping them and scry 1 more, you can create a very powerful engine. I mean, obviously by that stage, the opponent is almost close to death. Now, my pick for an interesting card from this card combination is Stinging Stinging, I would like to stress that there's a G there, lionfish. 2 mana, 2/1 fish creature enchantment as well. Whenever you cast your first spell during each opponent's turn, you may tap or untap target non-land permanent. And I had lots of success with this card, but I played it very differently from most people that I've seen. Like most people try to play some kind of an instant before attack to tap their creature from the opponent, and I was using it to race. And by racing, I mean I allowed my opponent to attack. If they chose to attack, they tap their creature. That's fine. Then they played their creature, and if I didn't have the counter or I didn't want to counter that particular creature, I let it in. I played some instant at the end of turn, tapped it so it cannot block, and attack with my stuff. And it's very powerful to win races if you have particular card set in this color combination, which I will be talking in a second about. But I had a lot of success with this card, but basically not by using it to tap creatures before attack phase, but by using it at the end of the turn most of the time. And sometimes if the opponent is not really accustomed with all the cards in the format, maybe they won't notice that you can also untap something using that card and create a nice surprise for them. Okay. Also, it had a decent win rate. Like this card, I think in the first run of the format had pretty poor win rate, and in the second one it had slightly bigger. Hi, Sam. Now, when we look at the commons, the best common and color combination was Omen of the Forge. Something someone said recently in the chat that it was kind of bad. But it was not bad in this particular archetype. I can tell you that, because it's flash enchantment, so you can play it on your opponent's turn, which goes together with the ability of your Signpost Uncommon and a couple of other cards in the archetype. It's a flash 2-mana enchantment. It deals 2 damage to any target. Important, it can go face. And it has the same thing as all the other omens have, that you can pay 3 mana to sacrifice it and scry 2. Obviously, Omen of the Forge is a red card for the podcast listeners. And it had a win rate of 59.2%. Second place was Iroa's Blessing, a 4-mana enchantment aura, enchanted creature you control. And when it enters the battlefield, it deals 4 damage to target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls, and your enchantment creature gets +1/+1. So very much like the Kamigawa Neon Dynasty Twisted Embrace, but only costing 1 red mana instead of 2 black in the other case, but not being unconditional removal, only killing things that have toughness 4 or less. It still was a great card, and I think in every other red archetype except for the blue-red, it has a higher win rate than the Omen of the Forge. But the fact as Omen of the Forge it can be played as an instant was important. I think that the chat is asking if Theros Beyond Death was available as a Premier Draft. Yes, it was at some stage, I think in October 2020. But it definitely was as a Premier Draft for... Oh, yeah, there you go. Someone in chat says it was available late October, early November 2020 as a Premier Draft. But I think that then people were not tired with the current format. So I think that this time more people will play it. Unfortunately, the data from the actual cards is not available on 17 lands, but you can see the archetype win rate data. It's just very small sample size, though. Right. And my pick for the card that I wanted to stress is Deny the Divine. It's a 3-mana, 2 and a blue instant. Counter target creature or enchantment spell. If that spell is countered this way, exile it instead of putting it into its owner graveyard. So basically a hard counter for 3 mana that only can counter creature enchantment, but exiles, which is very important when you have those escape creatures in green and black especially. And I think that I picked this card, but in reality, I picked 3 cards at the same time. Because this is the holy trinity of the things that you want to be doing when you're playing blue-red tempo, which is my favorite archetype in the format. And it's basically Deny the Divine as a counter spell, Thirst for Meaning, which is 3 mana, draw 3 cards, discard 2 unless you discard an enchantment, when you can only discard 1. So card draw, and Vexing Gull, which is a 3 mana flash 2/2 flyer, which means that if you pass with your mana open on turn 3, the opponent has basically a choice. I can play into a counter spell. If I don't, they might draw cards to get me outcarded, or they can play a 2/2 flyer at instant speed. And you also have a choice. They play something. You think, is that interesting enough to counter? Probably not. If it's not, then I can play my Vexing Gull, or I can draw some cards if I need some responses. So because you can do so many things at instant speed, and on top of that, you can have your Omens of the Forge, you can have your Omens of the Sea. So there's plenty of stuff you can do on the instant speed, and at the same time, you also get those payouts from playing spells on your opponent turn, like the Mischievous Chimera or like the Stinging Lionfish. So there's plenty of things you can do at their turn, and I think the general idea of the deck was playing like try to get 1-drop, 2-drop, or maybe 2-drop, 2-drop, and then just keep your mana open and try to out-tempo your opponent by basically letting them play things that don't matter, countering things that matter, and then dropping your Vexing Gulls. Like my favorite decks in that format, they had like 6 counter spells. Because there's plenty of counter spells also in this format. Like 6 counter spells, bunch of 2-drops, couple of 3-drops if they had the right abilities, and then a bunch of card draw or something. And they worked. I would refer you to Ham TV. He was the master of that archetype. Okay. Red-green, the theme of the color combination was power 4 or greater. And here is the signpost uncommon. That's Warden of the Chained, 3 mana, 1 red-green. Trample, Warden of the Chained cannot attack unless you control another creature with power 4 or greater. Mind, it can block. And it's a 4/4. So 4/4 trample for 3 mana is really good rate. It has a very hard to fulfill condition to be able to attack. You need a creature with power 4 or greater. But you could get it. And you can see by the win rate of 60% that it was not a bad card, which means that probably you could get away with doing the power 4 or greater things. You couldn't probably go all ham on it. See what it is. But you could just get enough of those power 4 synergies to be able to play with the Warden. And the fact that it can block is not something that you can ignore, because it could block, and then all of a sudden can attack, and you can turn a corner using it. And 3 mana 4/4 wall, not great, but if it can attack in the end, that's pretty good. The top card at uncommon level was Fateful End, 3 mana instant, 3 damage to any target, scry 1. Just a very good rate removal spell. Nothing to write home about, but solid. And the card that I picked was Nessian Hornbeetle, a 2 mana 2/2. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if you control another creature with power 4 or greater, put a +1/+1 counter on Nessian Hornbeetle. So, for example, you can imagine that you play this on turn 2, the Nessian Hornbeetle on turn 2, you play Warden of the Chained before attacks on turn 3, instantly put a counter on the Beetle. Turn 4, at the beginning of combat, you put another counter on Beetle, you swing for 8. That's pretty good start based on 2 uncommons. So Nessian Hornbeetle had 60.9. There was plenty of other cards that had that could trigger the 4-power synergies. And actually, you will see it as the top common of the archetype, which is Nylea's Huntmaster, a 4 mana 4/3. When it enters the battlefield, target creature you control gets +X/+O until end of turn, where X is your devotion to green. So basically, in the early game, it just allowed you to get this 4-power. I'm sorry. My sneezing is particular. So in the early game, it's sort of, you play it on turn 4. Maybe you give +1/+2. Oh, did Mercurio gift subs? Oh, and Isaiah resub. Thank you both for the subs, but I'll continue with things. So Nylea's Huntmaster in the beginning can sort of bump a creature +1, maybe allow it to attack, and then give you this 4 power that you need for your other synergies. But late in the game, if you had like 5 devotion and you dump it all on some kind of trampling creature, all of a sudden you get +5/+0 and trample to your one of your creatures, which can actually either force multiple chump blocks to survive if you manage to get your opponent down to some kind of low life totals, or just straight out kill them out of nowhere if you have like something unblockable, a flyer or whatever. Top enchantment, and it had a solid win rate of 59.8, which is, not far off from the Signpost Uncommon. So yeah, quite good. Top enchantment was Omen of the Forge again at 59%. So not far off from the top common. We talked about this card, so no point in adding. My pick was a card that was just 0.1% win rate lower than the Omen of the Forge, and it's Flammox Cyclops. Flammox Cyclops, which is a 4-mana 4/4 with reach. It has reach. Edmund, you need to go further. You need to go back to January of 2020. And then you will have Theros Beyond Death data and 17 lands. That's I would advise, if you want to watch the data on your own, you need to go a bit back, because the quick drafts for Theros Beyond Death were in January of 2020. So yeah, no problem. You don't have to apologize. No apologizes here, yo. So it has 4-mana 4/4 with reach. Whenever 2 or more creatures your opponents control attack, it cannot block this combat. Yeah, not a very good blocker, but it has 4 power, and it's a decent attacker, like basically a vanilla 4/4 4/4, which is pretty okay for red. And it had decent numbers in this particular archetype, and maybe not so many people are keen to get it for other archetypes. So probably you should be able to get it if you want it, and you will get this condition of getting a 4-power creature. So again, if you play Warden of the Chain on turn 3, you play Flammox Cyclops on turn 4, enable attack with the Wardens, and happy times. And Secret Reach was something that people bumped into several times. So yeah. The only problem is that, like, as a blocker, it's not really great, because they attack with 2 creatures, just can't block. Right, black green. The Signpost uncommon for that was Acolyte of Affliction. 2 black green for a 2/3 human cleric. When it enters the battlefield, put the top 2 cards of your library into your graveyard. I'm wondering if that's been errata to mill. I assume so. So that will trigger also the black blue uncommon, I guess. Oh, yeah, okay, it literally says that. Okay. So it mills you for 2. And then you may return a permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. So like a very nice attrition card. When you play it late, you mill for 2 and you get your best thing from the graveyard. When you play it early, you probably gamble that you're going to hit something. But I think that this is a card that gets much better when you draw it late in the game than when you have to play it quite early. So it's not good in the early game, which is a suggestion for the archetype already. This is not an archetype that wants to aggro you out. This is an archetype that is probably even more attrition-y than the blue-black. It was all about getting stuff in your graveyard, playing some escape creatures, getting value, getting removal, and it was pretty successful as an archetype. So the Signpost has 59.9% win rate. The top card in uncommon slot was Elspeth Nightmare again. Again, kill a creature, discard a card, exile graveyard, games that match. And the card that I wanted to draw your attention to is the Chainweb Arachneer. That's a 1-mana 1/2 with reach. When it enters the battlefield, it deals damage equals to its power to target creature with flying and opponent controls, and you can escape it for 5 and exile 4 cards, and it escapes with 3+1/+1 counters on it, so it becomes a 4/5 spider. And this card was absolutely crucial for this deck, because this deck had one big weak spot, and that was flyers. So chain web arachnider was really crucial to have in order to completely neutralize the flying threat. Okay. In terms of commons, the top common was Voracious Typhon, 4 mana 4/4, but it has escape for 7 mana and exile 4 other cards from your graveyard. It came back as a 7/7. So that card was super annoying to deal with. You could chump it for ages, you could tap it or something, but still the 7/7 is a pretty big stat line. Top enchantment just behind the Typhon, which had a 60.3, which, by the way, again, is higher than the Signpost Uncommon, but that doesn't mean the cards were the Signpost Uncommon was bad. It's just that those commons were very powerful in that archetype. Myers Grasp with 60.1 as the best enchantment, again, -3/-3 to target creature. And card I selected because I think that this is the particularly color part where this card was particularly shining is Return to Nature, 2 mana instant, choose one, destroy artifact, destroy enchantment, or exile target card from a graveyard. Now, we talked that there is 46 enchantment creatures, there is 91 enchantments altogether in the set, which is quite a number. And exiling card from a graveyard is very important if you play a long game, and Black Green wanted to play a long game. That's why probably Return to Nature was particularly good in it. Springbok, it's hard to say because most colors don't even have escape creatures, so it probably depends on the deck. I would say you probably want 3/4 if you have access to them. 2 will be enough. But like white and blue don't have any escape creatures. Red has a couple. Oh, just in black green, you mean? The question is how many escape creatures? Not too many if you plan to escape them, but keep in mind that if you trade them and you don't want to escape them, you can just exile them. So for me, it would depend. I probably, if I played like a black green, I would want to have one Farika spawn and then a couple of others, and I'm happy. And obviously, like Voracious Typhon has good numbers, so I probably wouldn't mind having one here as well. Right. Yeah, Paprika's spawn is an annoying card as hell. Now, Black Red had a slight sacrifice theme, but the Signpost Uncommon is not like mind-blowing in terms of its numbers. The Signpost Uncommon is Slaughter Priest of Mogis, and remember, you cannot spell Slaughter Priest of Mogis without spelling Laughter. It's a black-red Minotaur Shaman. It's a 2/2. Whenever you sacrifice a permanent, it gets +2/+0 until end of turn, and it also can sacrifice another creature or enchantment, and it gains first strike until end of turn. So basically, for 2 mana, I can sacrifice anything and give you +2/+0 and first strike. But if you have other sacrifice activators that are cheaper, you can maybe sacrifice one thing to give it first strike and sacrifice other things just to give it +2/+0. Card was fine. It's a decent 2-drop, but nothing to write home about again. And the numbers are quite far off the best uncommons. Best uncommon, again, Elspeth Nightmare. And I think Elspeth Nightmare is just such a good card. So I know that there's a lot of people talking about Farika Spawn being this annoying engine, but I honestly think that Elspeth Nightmare was just the best uncommon in the set point. And you can quote me on that because no one cares. Anyway, this is the decision whether Elspeth Nightmare is the second best or the first best uncommon in the set. Choice you won't be faced with a lot, but might come in handy. I would pick Elspeth Nightmare. My pick in this form, in this particular archetype, was Farika's Spawn. I think that it's very important in this particular color combination, because the trouble that those black red decks were sometimes falling into was too much removal, not enough threats. And Farika's Spawn is a great recurring threat. So you need to draw it once, and then all the removal that you used on the creatures of your opponent all of a sudden can be utilized for the second time to get Farika's Spawn back and also kill something. So yeah, that's pretty useful. Great card, by the way. Farika's Spawn is a 4-mana 3/4. It has escape for 6 mana and exiling 3 cards. It escapes with 2 +1/+1 counters, so it counts back as a 5/6. And when it enters the battlefield this way, each opponent sacrifices a non-Gorgon creature. It itself is a Gorgon. So mirror matchup of 2 Farika Spawns was a pretty boring business, but once it comes as a 5/6, you can start attacking with it, and then the opponent has a choice. Do I double block it to kill it, and then you replay it, and I have to sacrifice a third creature? Or do I let it in for 5 every turn, or do I chump losing a creature every turn? It's not a great choice for anyone, and that's again why things like the final death were quite useful by being able to exile this kind of recurring threats. And commons in this color combination, best common was Iroa's Blessing at 61.1, and top enchantment, except for Iroa's Blessing, which we already talked about, the deal 4 damage aura that gives +1/+1. But the other top enchantment was a creature, and that was Lampad of Death's Vigil. Lampad is a 1 and a black 1/3 enchantment creature nymph, and it has the ability 1, sacrifice a creature, drain 1, basically. So each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. And this card was like a linchpin of many decks. I don't know. There's so many games when I won by dropping my opponent to 6 and then sacrificing 6 creatures from Lampad and just draining them for 6, and that was the end of the game. Always stressful to do that, but when you don't see any other way of winning the game, sometimes you have to dig deep. The card that I picked for as an interesting one is Portent of Betrayal. It's a common, 4 mana sorcery, gain control of target creature until end of turn. Untap that creature, it gains haste until end of turn, scry 1. So, your general threat and effect, this time with scry 1, but costing 4 mana. But it's fine that it costs 4 mana because you have 1 mana sacrifice sources like the Lampad that we just talked about. So for 5 mana, you can steal something and sacrifice it, which is important. If you're so lucky, you can even have Woe Strider and have the 0 mana sacrifice outlet for the Portent of Betrayal. So I think that there is a capability of drafting the Steal and Sack deck. I'm sure that Jason ILTG will very soon update us with some trophy pictures of Steal and Sack atrocities from Theros Beyond Death. But what I wanted to stress is that it had a decent win rate. It's not like super high on the level of the top cards, but not far back. So 57.7 is just fine. And I'm pretty sure that there can be a very nice and happy deck, happy spot for having 3 Portents of Betrayal and a couple of Lampads of Death Vigil, and annoying the hell out of the opponent by doing that. Right. So if Black Red was sacrifice and maybe steal in terms of a theme, White Black is auras, but auras that are used as a removal more than as an enhancement. If you can catch my drift. So obviously there are 2 types of auras normally in Magic the Gathering. There are the auras that you play on your creature and make them bigger, and there are auras that you play on the opponent's creatures and make them not attack or smaller or exiled. Bunch of stuff. And I think that the White Black was sort of aiming at the second one. It's a very classical attrition-y archetype when you want to, again, nickel and dime your opponent by accruing some kind of value. The Signpost Uncommon is Rise to Glory. It's a 5-mana sorcery. Choose one or both. Reanimate a target creature from your graveyard, or reanimate target aura from your graveyard to the battlefield. Or you can do both, obviously. So you have a creature and an aura in your graveyard. You can put both of them. Now, the most important thing about this card is, for some arcane reasons that can be traced to the invasion of Visigoths on Rome in 2nd century BC AD. When aura enters the battlefield from a graveyard and not being cast from your hand, it doesn't target, which means that Rise to Glory was one of the very few ways of dealing with Dream Trawler, because you can reanimate an aura and put it on Dream Trawler, and there's nothing your opponent can do about it because it doesn't target, so it doesn't give hexproof. Most of the time, if they don't know that thing, they also lose a card because they tried to give it hexproof. Little they know. Yeah, and also the Kraken token from Kiora Beast the Sea God can be dealt in that way. So that's some. Yeah, and also Flicker of Fate works on an aura in play to do that exactly the same. That's few things that can deal with Dream Trawler. It's always good to remember. We won't be playing best of 3, so you won't be able to sideboard into it. But it's good to know that you can do that kind of trick. But the win rate is not impressive for that. 56.6. It means that it probably should wait to get it like in late picks and not, hardcore attack getting this card in your deck. Now, Mire Triton is the top card in the archetype, and I always love that card. It's phenomenal. It's just so simple design, but such a great feel. It's a 2-mana 2/1 with Death Touch, and it enters the battlefield. You mill 2 of your own library, and you gain 2 life. Now, as I told you, 3 cards is roughly an equivalent of drawing a card. Milling 2 cards is an equivalent of drawing a card. So that's basically draws you 2/3 of a card-ish, gains you 2 life, and is a very annoying obstacle by being a 2/1 Death Toucher. Perfect card for this deck because it wants to get slightly later into the game, and because it wants to get later to the game, well, this is perfect because you can kill something much bigger at the time, gain you some life cushion, so it stops one attack by a 2/2, so you don't have to jump with a 2/2 with it because you get this nice 2 life cushion and stuff like that. Now, my pick for the card that is interesting is Hateful Eidolon. It's a 1-mana 1/2 with lifelink. And, in traditionally archetype, this 1/2 with lifelink, if you play it on turn 1, can do some serious damage because you remove quite a lot of their creatures. But what it also has is, whenever an enchanted creature dies, draw a card for each aura you control that was attached to it. And there are a couple of auras that kill creatures right away. You had the Mire's Grasp, for example. So if you have the Eidolon on the board and you play Mire's Grasp on a 3/3, instantly you also draw a card, which is amazing. There are a couple of other auras, like the one that gives +2/-1 that has Escape, and if you can chain that a couple of times and you can target the creatures of your opponents with aura, or even target your creatures with +2/-1 and attack with them, forcing your opponent to chump block your stuff or take quite a chunk of damage, because if they get +2/-1, probably they were 2/2, so you're attacking with a 4/1. If they don't block, they lose 4 life. If they do block, you draw a card, which is and they lose some kind of a creature. So Mogus Favor is the name of that. So you can get plenty of stuff, and of course your own enchanted creatures with the positive enchantments. If they die, they also will draw your card. So plenty of things to do. It's slightly build around-ishy, but you can get quite a lot from that card in the right deck, and the win rate is solid 60.8. So you should think about it. Now, top commons, 2 of them there are. Heliod's Pilgrim, 3-mana 1/2 human cleric. When it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for an aura card, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle your library. And number 2 is Mire's Grasp, which is something that you can find with Heliod's Pilgrim. And there's plenty of other auras that you can find with Helios Pilgrim. That's probably why it's a top card and common in this archetype. And like a curve out Hateful Eidolon, Mire Triton on turn 2, then Helios Pilgrim, and the next turn kill something with Mire's Grasp is not so bad at all. Because you draw a card, you melt something, you put some bodies on the board at the same time you stop the developing opponent, whatever they were doing. Yeah, plenty of attrition. My pick was the card that really, really strongly surprised me to see it in as one of the top commons. It's the Leonine of the Lost Pride, 2-mana cat warrior, 3/1. Whenever it dies, exile target card from an opponent's graveyard. So slightly better than the vanilla free one. But I can imagine that this played on turn 2, and then you have removal, can do quite some substantial amount of damage, and later can also nab some kind of annoying escape creature from opponent's graveyard if you have a good target. Yeah, Leonin has a higher game in hand win rate than Rise for Glory, and that was really surprising for me. Now, keep in mind those Theros Beyond data are not based on like super large sample size, which should, I should be at least slightly weary of them, of those results. You shouldn't question them, but there might be some cards that are just weird outliers. But I saw Leonin of the Lost Pride also doing pretty well in a couple of other color combinations, which makes me trust this data much more. So yeah. Next archetype is Hero of the Next, who is the Boros. Long day is starting to take its toll on me. White Red is based on sort of its own version of Heroic. So there's 5 or 6 creatures in the white and red exclusively that have the same ability. Whenever you cast a spell that targets Hero of Nyxborn, creatures you control get +1/+0 until end of turn. And the signpost uncommon is Hero of Nyxborn, which is plenty of a card. So it's 3 mana, 1 red, white. Enchantment creature, human soldier. It's a 2/2. When it enters the battlefield, also you create a 1/1 human soldier creature token. So basically, whenever you target it with anything, all your creatures will get +1/+0. So it will get +1/+0, so it will become a 3/2. But also the 1/1 white human soldier creature will get +1/+1. So basically, targeting it, it creates 5 power. If you have some other creatures, it will generate much more value. So the deck basically tells you to go quite wide and have things that are capable of targeting your heroic creatures. Now the signpost has 58.6% win rate, which is good. And then I'll wait with my conclusions to the next slide, but the best card altogether was Commanding Presence, which is a 4-mana, 3 and a white aura. Enchanted creature gets +2/+2, has first strike, and whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. So it allows you to target your things, but at the same time, it also allows you to go wider and also allows to push damage through a big creature, which is great. And my pick for the card that was interesting is Alseid of Life's Bounty. I think even constructed players should know this one because it's a particularly annoying card in some kind of Bogle-like strategies in constructed. It's a 1 white, so basically white mana, so 1 casting cost. Enchantment creature Nymph, 1/1. It has lifelink, so basically 1/1 lifelinker enchantment creature for 1, but it also has 1 sacrifice it. Target creature or enchantment you control gains protection from the color of your choice until end of turn. And for a 1-drop, maybe that was like the first 1-drop to be a card that cannot be ignored. It has decent numbers in this particular archetype, 57.3% game and hand win rate, and that was still in times when 1-drops were probably considered considered not that great, basically. Okay. So in terms of commons in this format, top card is Iroha's Blessing again, the deal 4 +1/+1 aura. Top enchantment, so second enchantment really because Iroha's Blessing is already one, is Omen of the Sun, a 3-mana omen with flash, as all the omens are. When it ETBs, create 2/1/1 white human soldier creature tokens, and you gain 2 life. And has sacrifice, like all the omens. White and 2 colorless, sacrifice to scry 2. It's a good card, allows you to go slightly wide, create some bodies, is at instant speed, can trigger some constellation triggers. Now, the card that I picked, because it was based on small sample size but with a really high win rate, is Infuriate, which is a 1-mana instant red. Target creature gets +3/+2 until end of turn. So it's like sort of like not quite Giant Growth, like Giant Growth, 5/6 of Giant Growth. But this was the second best common in terms of win rates in this archetype. And I thought that this is interesting because I wouldn't expect that to be so. Now, Explode Things, first of all, thanks for the follow. About Time, hello, is asking, where is Wrap in Flames? Yeah, exactly. Where is Wrap in Flames? And I might need to log into 17, to go on 17 lines to show you, but that's what really surprised me in those data. Rapid Flames was pretty bad in that particular outing of Theros Beyond Death in terms of bot drafts. It might have been. Oh god, I don't want this card ratings. Sorry, it's gonna take me a couple of seconds to find the right. Blob. 19. Okay. Color combinations: white, red, and rarity common. Oh, okay. And let's sort cards by game and hand win rate. So we have top 3 commons were basically Iroha's Blessing, Infuriate, Omen of the Sun. Then we have Dreadful Apathy, Rage Hound, Indomitable Will, Leonin of the Lost Pride, again quite high, Heliod's Pilgrim, Incendiary Oracle, Omen of the Forge, Pious Wayfarer, Sentinel's Eye, Sunmane Pegasus, and only then Hero of the Pride, which is the better of the heroic common creatures. It's a 2-mana, 2/2, and has the same ability as the Hero of Nyxborn. So only after at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14th best common is the first one that has the ability of the giving +1/+1. Then we have the Stampede of Raider, Aspect of the Manticore, Traveler's Amulet, Ascendant, Transcendent Envoy, Flamox Cyclops, Revoke Existence, Captivating Unicorn, Katametra's Blessing, and then we have Hero of the Games, the second of the heroic common creatures, much lower. I don't even want to count. Blah 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 blah, and then I go and then I find Wrap in Flames at the game in hand win rate of 52.3%. Now, that's pretty close to the bottom. That's like cards that were worse than that were not so great. Like literally 2-mana 1/3s and something like that. So it might be that people didn't put them in the right decks. It might be that people build the decks badly. But I find it super surprising if Hero of the Games and Hero of the Pride were also performing badly, that Wrap in Flames would not be performing badly. I think that this is a particular case when when Hero of Nyxborn is good because it's just good on rate, and maybe sometimes you will target it with some kind of an aura. But I don't think that this was a deck where you wanted to go completely all in. And I think that you can see that slightly from the cards that were performing well in this deck. So when we look at the commons again, Iroas's Blessing, Omen of the Sun, some removal, some creatures that had lots of attack that could be played early. So you see that from 2 drops, Underworld Ragehound, which is a 2 mana 3/1 attacks each turn when able, and Leonin of the Lost Pride had higher win rates. I think that one of the problems was that Hero of the Pride and what's the name? Hero of the Games. The Hero of the Pride had a quite low alpha, so it was taken quite early by the bots, and maybe that was the problem, that you didn't get enough of those and you couldn't get those busted decks. Once maybe in the first time that Theros Beyond Death was out, you could get it much easier, or in human drafts it's much more likely to happen. So maybe it was just the fault of the bots, and we're going to talk about it a bit later, speculating about how bot nature of that draft changed it. I still think that I remember playing the versions with Wrapped in Flames that were good, but not in that particular outing. Maybe it was because people misassembled those decks, but from the data picture, at least from that outing of the bots, it seemed that this is an aggressive deck, but not necessarily going all in on the heroic combos. Right. Almost last archetype. Second to last archetype is white green uncommon. White green, and that's positive auras as an archetype. And the signpost was Siona, captain of Pyleas. So I guess Jason and the Argonauts. 1 green white for a 2/2. When it ETBs, look at the top 7 cards of your library. You may reveal aura from among them and put in your hand. Put the rest at the bottom of your library in the random order. And you will probably get Warbriar's Blessing out of it, or Citizen Training, or something else. I mean, it's basically automatically 3 mana draw a card if you have the right deck for that. And also, when an aura you control becomes attached to a creature you control, create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. So it definitely promotes the how to call it, the positive use of auras to enhance your creature, rather than the negative use of aura to kill the creatures of the opponents. But it has not great. Keep in mind, Mystic Repeal has an insane win rate compared to all the other cards in that archetype for some reason. So it has an okay win rate, 57.7. Card was solid, but you need slight amount of building around to play it properly. So you want to have some of those auras that you can attach to your own creatures. A question from Dynamo Des. How badly Hydra's growth ranks? We can actually check it very, very, very easily. Just 2 clicks. And because if I remember, it was not doing bad at all. Hydra's growth had a 58.1% win rate. Now, Hydra's growth is a 3 mana enchantment aura. Enchant creature. When Hydra's growth enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on that creature. At the beginning of your upkeep, you double the number of +1/+1 counters on the enchanted creature. So you basically start growing something immensely, and if the opponent cannot deal with it, it just gets out of hand and you win the game. Most of the time, opponent can deal with it because this set is full of removal, but also that's why you want to have that removal, because if you don't have interaction and someone plays you Hydra's growth, you are in the world of pain, especially if that something has trample, because a couple of turns and it becomes just unattainable to. I think the biggest one that killed me was 256 +1/+1 counters. I jumped till I could, but just ran out of options. So the top uncommon is Mystic Repeal, 1 mana green. So 1 green. So hard to say 1 green. 1 mana value, costing green, to cast instant. Put target enchantment on the bottom of its owner's library. So yeah, I mean this was just great. Like you could really blow the opponent out of the water by playing it carefully, and there were just enough enchantments to make this good. And it has 64.4% win rate, which is great. My pick for the card that I would select is Commanding Presence again. I think that it highlights what this deck sort of wants to do, have some auras that are positive, and the card has a good win rate. We talked about it. It's the +2/+2 first strike, and when it connects, create a human soldier. In terms of commons, top common is Warbriar Blessing, another positive aura, and another time that the picture didn't load for some reason. Maybe, I think we should tell Scraffle that maybe they have a bad picture, or maybe I uploaded it badly. Best enchantment apart from Warbriar Blessing is Dreadful Apathy, the removal we didn't talk about. That's why it's good to put it here. It's white and 2 colorless for an aura. Enchant creature. Target creature cannot attack or block. And for 3 mana, you can exile enchanted creature. The important thing is that many people already told it before me, but I will repeat. If you put the effect on stack and you have in manual control on arena, there is a flicker effect spell that can flicker the aura. The activated exile ability will still happen, so the creature is as good as dead at that moment, or even worse than dead, exiled. But the apathy will return, and you can put a new target for it, only you don't target. So you just put it on another creature. Hexproof won't do anything. It just will happen. So again, one of the few ways of dealing with Dreamcrawler, which is something good to know. And there's my pick for that particular archetype, Voracious Typhon, 4 mana, so 2 and green, 4/4, and it has Escape for 7 mana. It comes back as a 7/7. I think that this card is particularly good in this archetype because you also want to play your Citizen Trainings, the +1/+0 trample auras that draw a card. And 8/7 Trampler is something that you can't chump for very long. Okay. Tick, 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 tick. And the last color combination, the top win rate according to the data from 17 lands, is Azorius. We started with 3 blue color combinations because they were the lower win rate ones, and we finished with the highest performer, the white-blue. Now, part of that is having access to 3 of the 4 incredible bombs in this format. I'm pretty sure of that. Because Dreamcrawler, Archon of the something, Sun's Grace, and Kiora Best the Sea God are all in blue and white. But that's definitely not all of it. I mean, it definitely helps that Dreamcrawler is exactly in blue-white color combination. But they also have the best uncommon of the whole format. And this is Staggering Insight, the highest win rate uncommon in the format according to the 17 lands data. Is Staggering Insight. It's just an aura. It's just a 2 mana aura costing white and white-blue. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and has lifelink and has, whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. So no biggie, you just make your creature into something that stabilizes and makes you unkillable and also draws you gas. The card is just mental. If you see it, pack 1, pick 1, and there is no bomb, I'll just slam it. And I'm not even sure if of the 12 bombs I mentioned earlier earlier in the seminar, I showed 12 bombs. I'm not even sure if I would pick every single one of them above Staggering Insight. The card is just great. Top card, well, Staggering Insight is top card, but it's also a Signpost uncommon. Top card, apart from that, is Laguna Band Storyteller. It's a 4 mana, 3 and white creature center advisor. It's a 3/4, yeah. When Laguna Band Storyteller enters the battlefield, you may put target enchantment card from your graveyard on top of your library if you do gain life equal to its converted mana cost. Card is great. It stabilizes you in multiple ways. And yes, it doesn't draw, but it is a very good card selection if you had some interesting enchantments in your graveyard. And, yes, there are a couple of sagas. Staggering Insight is in this set, so you can get something good if it's late in the game, probably very good even. 63.5% win rate is solid. And my pick for an interesting card is Archon of the Falling Stars. It's a 6 mana, so 4 white creature Archon, 4/4 with flying. And when it dies, you may return target enchantment card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So it works well with Laguna Band Storyteller and Archon of the Falling Stars are sort of caring about similar things. So yeah, 4/4 with flying kills you very quickly, and if you kill it, opponent gets something probably useful if they build their deck around it, which is a great ability to have, because I like to put my opponents in the positions when they're damned if they do and damned if they don't. In terms of commons, Omen of the Sun, it's another enchantment, so works with the other two that I mentioned. It creates 2 bodies which can jump block or even kill something as an ambush. It gains you 2 life, which is something that this deck wants to do. It probably will die to more aggressive decks. Luckily, there's not so many aggressive decks, so you're quite well positioned to be in a good spot. And later, it can also fix your draws because you can sacrifice it to scry 2. Top enchantment, except for Omen of the Sun, which has a 63.4% win rate, which is close to Laguna Band Storyteller. I mean, from the data that we looked at, there is a bunch of commons that have uncommon level kind of win rates. So that's something that's maybe interesting to look at. Top enchantment, except for the Omen of the Sun, is the Witness of Tomorrows. That's a 5 mana, so 4 in the blue. Enchantment creature Sphinx. It's a 3/4 with flying, and for 4 mana you can scry 1, so 3 in the blue, you scry 1 at instant speed. No tapping required, so you can scry quite a lot in the late game if there's nothing to be done for you. My pick, card that didn't appear except for in mention when I was talking about the blue-red, but Thirst for Meaning, the 2 colorless and 1 blue instant, draw 3 cards, then discard 2 cards unless you discard an enchantment card. This deck doesn't want to be super fast. It wants to be more grindy, and think drawing cards in this particular case is good. And you will have quite a lot of enchantments that will be a good fodder for discard. And yeah, solid 63.3% win rate just off Omen of the Sun, but actually higher than Witness of Tomorrows, although those differences are negligible. Right, we went to the end of the archetypes, but I have some other numbers. I told you that I took the archetype win rates from the 17 Lands website, but I also found some old school data that I had in my computer from the files that I was analyzing. That was one of the first sets that I was literally got the data from via Misnomer to look at, to make some Twitter thread in the ancient days. I didn't even have the composition of each deck. I just had like win, or how many mulligans were there, and how many creatures were in the deck, but without knowing exactly what was in it. And I couldn't even distinguish between different decks because there was no deck ID kind of thing. So much poorer data, but I could definitely look at the archetype win rate. And when I looked at the archetype win rates, I got slightly different numbers. First of all, you see that Golgari, which was 5th from the bottom, in my data set from way back when, was actually the highest win rate archetype. And Rakdos was 2nd, even though here it was only 6th. All the white archetypes dropped ever so slightly. Still, quite consistently, Simic, Dimir, and Izzet were the 3 bottom archetypes in both kind of data sets. So some things didn't change, some things changed slightly. This is just to show you that you take slightly different number of games from slightly different time, maybe looking at slightly different composition, because maybe these were with splash or without splash. And you have big differences in how the format will look, because from the situation when in the beginning you were telling me, oh, all 4 white decks are the highest win rate, we moved to the situation when top 2 decks have black in it. And that's a different story altogether, isn't it? But it's not really, because the differences between those decks are rather small. And I think that, very much like I told you that games in Theros Beyond Death are all about nickel and diming and getting minuscule advantages, I think that this whole format is all about small differences. And I think that barring Simic, Dimir, and Izzet, of which I think that both of them, all 3 of them, have valid builds, they just need to be slightly more open. All the archetypes are perfectly playable, and it's much more important for you to try to figure how to make the build for a particular archetype than to waste your energy on trying to find the best archetype, because I don't think that there is one. Right. There's one very important aspect of this format. That's why I was talking about this being a slow format, and slow formats are different from super fast formats, mainly, well, not mainly, also because in slow formats, games will last more turns, which means being on the play is not giving you that much benefit. Being on the draw gives you the benefit of having 1 extra card in the late game than your opponent did, and the advantage of playing things first disappears after 10 turns usually. So this is the format with the smallest on-play advantage from any set that was ever on Arena that was covered by the 17 lands data. On play, 17 lands users had 55.6% win rate. On draw, 55.4%. That's basically on par. Now, usually when I show data like this, you think, oh, well, it's very close to be on the play and on the draw, but you have to keep in mind we have 10 archetypes, and those archetypes will have differently been affected by those numbers. So I did the same for each single color combination. And red-green especially wants to be on the play. It has 4 percentage point difference in win rate between being on the play and being on the draw. Blue-red wants to start games, white-green wants to start games, and to some extent white-red wants to start games, but that's very small effect. Now, black-green, white-blue, and black-red, they don't really care that much, but blue-green would rather be second, white-black would rather go second, and blue-black definitely would like to go second. So, yeah. Just let it sink in a bit, and you won't be able to choose whether you want to be on the play or on the draw, but it's good to know which archetypes prefer to be on the draw, because that tells you a bit about the mindset of the archetype. Noobloom says, I played mostly Boros and I expected it would be one of the smaller gaps, but 0.2 surprises me a lot. You mean you're surprised by... Oh, you played Boros, okay. 0.2 is the number that we consistently got from that particular set. And yeah, I mean, you can see how many of the archetypes actually literally prefer to be on the draw. So I told you also that this was the slowest format. The average game length was over 10 turns, and no other set since 17 Lands started looking at data and solid quantities was even close to that number. So that there was 9.6 or something average length in some ones, but this one is over 10. And of course, it's also good to look at the aggressiveness of each color by looking at the average game length on the play and on the draw. Well, basically, white-red has shorter games when it's on the... that's not true. That's the average game length when you win or when you lose. Why am I lying to myself in the description of this thing? So white red decks, when they win much quicker. When they lose well on like on average game length. And same goes for red green and white green. Those decks want to win games a bit faster, which is actually quite surprising that white red didn't have that kind of uh, advantage of being on the play. But it seems that maybe white red can also close the game while not starting the game because other decks are so slow. And the other decks are sort of on par with this average 10 turns per game, so nothing special here. I think that particularly blue-black wants to drag the games ad infinitum before they win, but they also stop themselves from losing relatively quickly. So these are the decks that can support longer game. And again, no surprise that blue-black is the one that has the biggest advantage of being on the draw, because games with blue-black will last much longer. Unless you play blue-black tempo, which is a completely different deck, and that probably was very much underrepresented in those draft data. Okay, one last thing is that this is something to look at the historic data from 17 lands. You will see things that you didn't see before. One thing in particular was that it was still best of one, but the mulligan frequency, my, 15% of the people took mulligan, and 1.4 even double mulligan. So actually 16% of the people took a mulligan. That's way too much. I think a well-constructed deck should take mulligans at around 6 to 8%. And you should definitely do that, because look at the punishment for taking the mulligan. The win rate of games without mulligans was 57.6. Games with one mulligan, 44.2. So you lose 13 percentage points by mulliganing. That's like changing from ham into a normal person, which would be sad. This is like changing from corticals into a normal person. You lose 13 percentage points of your win rate. So that's how much a mulligan did in this format for you. If you double mulligan, that basically you lose 28 percentage points of your win rate. So completely unattainable. And you don't have to do that, because maybe the mana wasn't great, but you can put the number of lands that will help you to draw enough things. If you have 2 lands, you should be able to play some things. So, you know. So yeah, don't mulligan unless you really have to. And when you look at the hand and said, maybe I should mulligan it, probably you don't. Probably it's better you keep it. If you see a hand that you should mulligan, you probably know that you have to mulligan it instantly without doubting it. Right. Whew. Those were the last couple of slides. We're there. So I would like to thank 17 Lands team, although probably the data that was there was from archives when there was a different team long time ago. But I'm sure that no matter how long ago it was, Viral Misnomer was involved in getting those data. So thanks to him. I would also like to thank Hululu, Grantwu, and ZTM, all the other devs that deal with 17 Lands stuff. Also, big thanks to Fake Jake Brown for helping me with putting it out in the podcast version. And since we are on the topic of the podcast version, I would like to thank SSQ and Mana Junkie for the music I use as the intro and outro. And with that, I'll see you next week.